Bonsoir à tous. Je suis très contente de savoir que je ne suis pas la dernière. Quand même, je voulais profiter de ça parce que je sais que déjà c'est 18h. Je veux vous demander de s'élever, s'il vous plaît, tout le monde, juste pour 1 minute. On va faire un exercice très vite. Je vais continuer en anglais parce que je ne sais pas comment je vais dire en français. Okay. We're going to spell a word malheureusement in English parce que le mot en français c'est très court. Nous tous, je crois que puisqu'on est dans le secteur agricole, on connaît coconut. Yes. Le coco. Okay, mais we're going to spell it with our bodies. So, thank you. Vous l'avez déjà commencé. Okay, so I'll do the example. Can you all see me? No. Because of the light. Okay, can you all see me now? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to do an example, then we'll all follow, okay? So coconut. Okay, I'm here. Okay, so exactly. So C O C O N U T. So now we all have to do it again because that was my example. Okay, so between C O C O N U T. Okay, everyone So thank you very much for participating in that little exercise. My name is Nana Amwa. I work with African Lead. I'd like to acknowledge our team who's here, Jane, John, Sonko, and Amadou. So African Lead, so today, let me just start by saying we've seen a lot of presentations today, gotten a lot of new information and data, but this presentation is not going to teach you anything new. I think what we're trying to do is reinforce and reiterate an approach that is very important to the successful implementation, design and implementation of the second generation knives. So African Lead has been working with IFPRI over the last couple of months in developing the knife 2.0 tools. Just to go over the content of the presentation, we're just going to quickly talk about the concept of the institutional architecture methodology, also look at the institutional architecture assessment and the workshop, briefly look at the 6 policy elements of the IAA, also look at the stakeholders who need to be involved in the assessment, and then look at a quick example of the mapping that was done in 2013. And then lastly, talk about the importance of the IAA in developing a knife. At this stage, most of us have already developed the first draft of our second generation knife, but I think the IAA is still important when it comes to the implementation so that we identify the challenges that need to be addressed. So we're all in the institutional architecture for food security and agriculture. So I think I'll just iterate that understanding a country's institutional architecture is important in designing and implementing our knife. I'll explain later on with the next slides what an institutional architecture is. Maybe for the sake of the translations, in French, institutional architecture is more than an arrangement. It's more about the system and sort of the building in which all the different stakeholders are involved in effecting policy change. The weaknesses in the institutional architecture can hinder the development and implementation of the knife, as well as the country's ability to undertake effective policy change. And so this is why Africa Lead and IFPRI have agreed and confirmed that there is a need there's a need for shared understanding of the institutional challenges and also a plan that needs to be developed to address these challenges and constraints. So the components of the institutional architecture support. We organized an institutional architecture workshop where the objective of this is to map out key systems, processes, and relationships that influence food security policy development process in each country. During the institutional architecture workshop, we conduct an institutional architecture assessment. Now, this assessment helps to analyze a country's capacity to undertake agriculture and food security policy change. So we'll go through a little deeper into how the workshops are structured, the objectives of the workshop, and the output at the end of the workshop. Again, for us at the stage that we're at, we would be looking to using this tool and approach in improving the implementation of the knives that we've developed. So this explains pretty much how the workshops are rolled out. So in January this year, African League with IFPRI organized the first institutional architecture clinic in Dakar with a few select stakeholders. We had some representatives from Ghana, we had Fatimata, Joseph, Jonazu, and Sonko, and some other members of this group who participated in that training. So these form a group of technical experts that will be deployed in each country. The idea is to organize a 2 or maximum 3-day workshop with a select group of individuals who are involved in the development of the NIBE and its implementation. So the objectives of the workshop are really to introduce and reinforce the principles of the institutional architecture to the stakeholder group. So like I said earlier, institutional architecture isn't something new to us, but it's something that we need to always remind ourselves about that can help in improving the coordination of the policy development process. In the workshop, we'll also review conclusions of the IFPRI Goals and Milestones report, which Usman and I believe Ismail talked about earlier this morning, and look at the policies that might be affected if recommendations of those reports are to be included in the second generation NIBES. Then, like I mentioned earlier, we'll conduct an institutional architecture assessment that identifies the weaknesses and the strengths in the country's institutional architecture as it relates specifically to the design and implementation of the second generation NIBE. So this is the ideal in designing and implementation, but at this stage, we'll be looking mainly at the implementation of the NIBE. Then one key output of the institutional architecture assessment is the mapping. The mapping really helps us to identify which stakeholders are involved in the different policy element areas of the institutional architecture. We're going to look at that soon. There are 6 policy elements of the institutional architecture which we'll go through. And then lastly, an action plan to address the gaps and the challenges in the institutional architecture. Okay, so there are 6 policy components of the IAA, and each of these components has sub-components, but the idea is that these 6 elements determine the country's readiness for policy change. So for example, we look at policy element 1. This talks about how predictable the guiding policy framework is in a country. So for example, for all of us ECOWAS states, we know we have the ECOWAS at the regional level. Up above that, we know we have the CADAP. So every single country needs to make sure that their national ag policy has a link, is linked and aligned to the regional and continental. The second policy element looks at policy development and coordination within the country, specifically looking at food security and agriculture. The third policy element looks at how inclusive stakeholder consultation is in the country, again, within the ag sector, and also looking at the other relevant stakeholders in the different ministries. The fourth policy element looks at evidence-based analysis, which I know we've talked about a lot today, the importance of data, quality data, and data analysis. The fifth policy element looks at policy implementation, the degree to which policy is implemented in each country. And then lastly, which we are all very familiar with, is mutual accountability, which we've been doing so well with our JSR in the past. Okay, so this is an example of the policy elements and the different subcomponents that we would typically look at in an IAA workshop. So we picked policy element 3, inclusivity and stakeholder consultation. Ideally, what happens in the workshop is we'll go through these questions, and what we expect is that the stakeholders and the participants are honest about the status in their country. So for example, we'll ask, what are the key laws, regulations, and policies governing the consultation process? Is this process predictable? To make sure that we have more information and in-depth analysis, we then ask further questions like, does the main coordination entity have clear goals and participation from key government ministries, beyond just the Ministry of Agriculture? And B, some representation from non-government entities, particularly from donors. So this is just an example that we took to show you how the assessment guide is structured. And what we do is we go through this with the participants so that we get the status of each stage for the country. So who is involved in an institutional architecture assessment? A lot of people, but a select group of people. So we ideally would want all the 9 focal points, coordination team members, and technical and sectoral working group members. So most countries tend to have this structure. Ideally, we would want to have 1 or 2 representatives in the workshop. Then we would also want to have the Ministry of Agriculture Planning, Statistics, Research and Information Unit, and M&E staff. This list is not exhaustive. Of course, it's also dependent on the country. Some might have, more relevant staff that need to be part of the workshop, and we're flexible enough to adapt to that. Then there's also representatives of relevant line ministries: Ministry of Finance, local government, trade, health, especially. Some ministries have nutrition embedded in health. Ministry of Water, as well as the Planning Commission staff. So this is where it's relevant in your country. If you have a Planning Commission staff, then you definitely will want 1 of them there. Also selected civil society organizations, private voluntary organizations, other groups such as women, youth, producer organizations, cooperatives, and any other relevant groups. And then donor representatives, CADAF, and regional economic community representatives. So again, I'll just like to stress that these stakeholders, again, should be closely linked to the agriculture and food security space in your country. So the institutional architecture mapping exercise really helps us to contextualize the effectiveness of the NIME and also ensure that all the stakeholders are on the same page. The good thing about having all stakeholders on the same page is that at the end of the day, we hold each other accountable for whatever commitments or engagement that we promise or confirm to do. And then at the end of the day, with the IA improvement action plan, we're able to develop a clear roadmap that delineates roles, responsibilities, and commitments of stakeholders. This is very important because a lot of times we sort of omit this stage where we're not clarifying who's doing what and who's responsible for what and who's supposed to be evaluating performances. Okay, so this is an example of the mapping that was done for Ghana, I believe in 2013. So you see the 6 policy elements are addressed in this mapping. So the top column are all the guiding policies of the country. For the Ghana team, this is old, so please don't Then the agencies that are responsible for evidence-based analysis are listed here. The bodies and structures that are responsible for policy development coordination are listed here. And then the structures, again, that are mostly responsible and involved in inclusivity and stakeholder consultation is also listed here. What this helps us do is really clarify who's responsible for what and who we go to for what kind of support in the institutional architecture. The last two elements are policy implementation. So again, these are the agencies and organizations responsible for that. Some are embedded in the Ministry of Agriculture, some are embedded in the Ministry of Finance. And then for mutual accountability, we've got the teams and the different stakeholders listed here. So this isn't a standard mapping template. It's an example. The mapping can be done differently in a way that's more representative of the country structure. So why the IAA? At the end of the day, the IAA is addressing high priority issues in designing and implementing our NIDE. When stakeholders are engaged at an early stage, for example, take the private sector. If we identify the key private sector stakeholders and actors early, you can be assured that the private investment in agriculture would increase because you'll be engaging them early and they would know what their responsibilities are. So that helps in inclusivity. Second is evidence-based analysis. We've talked about this a lot today. The importance of having quality data is also linked to having a national unit dedicated to the ag sector so that you're sure that there's a one-stop shop for information for ag data collection and analysis. And also to inform your policies and programs. And then monitoring and evaluation, that's been an issue that has been raised a few times over the last couple of years, and how the NIDE M&E framework needs to be linked to the national M&E framework and Malabo targets as well. And then political leadership, high-level political commitment. I think we know for sure that once we have the buy-in, we're at least assured of the functioning of the cross-sectoral policy coordination, and more importantly, sufficient financial resources. I think David just mentioned, asked a question about, do we do everything, the climate, smart agriculture, and all of these, if it's a national ag investment plan. But then when you have the high-level commitment, you can be assured that at least once you put certain projects or activities in the NIDE, you can be guaranteed, if all the institutions are coordinating, that there will be funding, there should be funding available to implement those activities. And then mutual accountability, establishing an enabling environment where stakeholders can gauge the progress of the NIDE, and also supporting the annual joint sector review and strengthening mutual accountability. And then lastly, this slide on trust. What I'd really, I'm not going to read all of this, but what I'd really like to say about this is that the institutional architecture really belongs to all of us. And it's really a sort of auto-evaluation of what is working and what is not working. And it's for us to identify where we know there are challenges and to ensure that those are addressed in the NIDE, or at least in the IA action plan, so that there's a justification for resource mobilization to fix those challenges or address those gaps at least. So it's important that the stakeholders involved understand that they will not be penalized for expressing honest assessments of the country's institutional architecture. It's very, very important for an effective NIDE implementation. And lastly, these workshops are going to be country specific, so we really need to work together and ensure that we have the right participants. And then at the end of the day, we're able to put together accurate mapping of the institutional architecture and develop an improvement